agenda that determine our national and common interest, especially in Africa and indeed Nigeria. My name is Tudi Alabi. Thank you for taking your time to join us on the program today. And good, it's another Friday. On the program today, we're taking a look at the renewed violent conflict between Israel and Palestine, and is of great concern to the world, including Nigeria. The inability of the global community to intervene and bring to an end a conflict that has lasted many decades leave many wondering what makes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict peculiar and intractable. It began late on Monday when reports filtered in that Hamas had launched dozens of long-range rockets towards Israel, with Israeli forces retaliating with airstrikes, leading to escalation of tension. Gaza's health ministry said that the death toll in this conflict from the Palestinians has climbed to 109, including 28 children and 15 women, with more than 500 people wounded. 7 people have been killed in Israel, including a child. The ongoing conflict, like the previous one, is being fueled by the planned eviction of dozens of Palestinians from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem, housing Israeli settlers who have waged a lengthy legal battle to take over the land. This issue has been a long-drawn battle. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the terrorist organization in Gaza have crossed the line as he attacked Israel with rockets. He made it very clear, absolutely clear, that they will pay a heavy price. He hinted that the fighting could continue for some time. While the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh says the rocket attacks will continue until Israel stops all the scenes of terrorism and aggression in Jerusalem and in Al-Aqsa Mosque, there is clearly no sign of the tension being doused, as both sides have resolved to escalate the attacks, while the international community, including the United Nations and the Security Council, unfortunately have both failed to take proactive steps to permanently end the conflict. The week-long violent attacks have been described as the most intense fighting since 2014, although the United Nations, Egypt and Qatar, who are frequent mediators between Israel and Hamas, are working to stop the fighting. It is not clear if the intervention will yield a more enduring peace between both parties. In the meantime, children, women, and the elderly are being killed, and on both sides in this conflict, especially by the Israeli airstrikes, just as their ground troops now move into Gaza, according to the Israeli military sources this Friday. On to this episode of the program, we shall review the escalation of tragic violence between the Israeli forces and the Palestinian militants. Why are diplomatic engagements yet to yield the desired results in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What's holding us back? What is the cultural and ethnic implications of the conflict for the Arabs and Jews in Israel? Joining us on the program today is Juliana Onjoku. Juliana is a Nigerian-born U.S. citizen, a former staff of the United Nations for Peace and Security Division of the United Nations Development Program, a policy analyst with conflict and peace management, including sustainability background from the University of Maryland, College Park, and Harvard. She joins us from Atlanta today. Thank you, Juliana, for taking the time to join. Also, we are joined by Priscilla Whipple. Priscilla is a British journalist based in London. Thank you, girls, for taking the time to join us on the program today. But before we come to you, let's quickly take this short break, and it's going to be another interesting program on the program. Don't go away.
اجى اتصل علي، انا بفكره واحد من البرج، قلت له تفضل مين ايش بدك؟ هاي الموتور شغال، امانك نازل؟ قال لي لا انا بدنا خليك معي وبدنا نضرب البرج. قلت له طيب كيف يعني شعوري تحطم وقتها، انا الى 20 سنه في البرج، يعني مضيت حياتي.
I'm from Palestine. I'm studying here in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. So we are here today to protest against Israeli occupation, against Muslim people in Palestine. They are entering Masjid al-Aqsa and they are making a lot of bad things. They are killing honest people and they are killing people that they are civilians. They don't have any weapons. So we are against these actions and we want to support our country.
The world has become more connected than ever before. Every continent, color, race, language, and religion, even government, move towards common goals. We now live in a global village. Here on this program, we bring you global issues to shape our world.
Government can do a lot with tax revenues collected for health and education.
The role of the European Union is to accompany a partner, that is Nigeria, in offering our lessons learned to see whether together we can improve that situation.
The emphasis on education, on vocational training, on the development of entrepreneurship is absolutely critical to its democracy.
The Nigerian government, we would ask them to follow up the investigations that we have had, the evidence that we have gathered, and ultimately we made a number of recommendations.
As we travel the world, we explore these issues of international and diplomatic relevance. Indeed, the global agenda that determine our national and common interests. With me, Tunde Alabi, live on the IT. All right, thank you for taking the time to join us on the program today. On the show today, we're taking a look at the escalation of hostilities between Israel and Palestine. And joining us on the program, said earlier on, is Juliana Njoku, an Atlanta-based Nigerian-born U.S. citizen who has been involved in peace and conflict resolution with the United Nations and also the United Nations Development Program. Juliana, thank you for taking the time to join us on the program today. Very well appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Appreciate it.
And also have Priscilla. Priscilla is a British journalist, always our guest on the show. We can always reach out to her. Priscilla, thank you for your time on the show today. Let me start with you.
Thank you, Tunde.
Yeah, let me start with you, Juliana. Juliana, quickly give us, I mean, you are at a point had a program done on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Quickly, briefly tell us a kind of a review of the situation up to where we are at the moment and where you think the situation can lead to.
Well, unfortunately, this is a 100-year battle that has existed globally since the end of the Ottoman Empire, at which then Britain had taken over what was then known as Palestine. In British's rule, they had agreed to an accord to establish a state for the Jews, especially coming from the Holocaust. So many at that point in time, when they took over the rule of what was then known as Palestine, it was a Arab-run country with a limited amount of Jews that lived in at that time. In recent years, over 600,000 Jews have relocated there following the Holocaust to establish that as the Holy Land because they believe that is their original land, at which then the Palestinians have pushed back and said that they were the occupiers of that land at that time. After 1948, British left unsuccessful to be able to create a commonality between both individuals or both groups that were occupying the state at that time. And conflict since the 1940s moving forward has arisen. Amongst several attempts to have peace accords in each one of, I think it's almost every other decade time spanned in the 80s. There was a 6-day war in the 60s. Increased the amount of distance between both groups because they could not establish that either one had full claim over the land. And as more conflicts were happening, as Israel was growing stronger, the establishment of the Israeli state, the Palestinians started to feel more marginalized as a group and therefore escalated with Hamas. Now we're here in 2021 and the battle continues to rage on as more individuals are getting involved intergenerationally, which each one of the conflicts leaving one group or the other more bruised and therefore more determined to say that they have full claim over the land, over the Holy Land, specifically Jerusalem.
Unfortunately, the incident between that period that you have highlighted and up to now has really claimed a whole lot of lives, especially on the Palestinian side, and we don't know how this is going to end. Again, the current conflict hostilities actually been described as one of the strongest after the 2014 hostility. Let me go to Priscilla. Priscilla, from your experience having studied the situation, why is the international community having problem resolving this matter? Why is the United Kingdom, why is the US, basically the Security Council, having difficulty resolving this matter?
I think they're having, first of all, thank you for having me today. And let me just go back onto what Juliana was just sharing with us. I think this problem stems really from right at the very beginning, as Juliana says, back in 1922. Now, when they had decided to divide this land, had they taken into consideration that they should divide it a little bit more equally? Because what they seem to have done was to give 90% of the land to the Arabs. And, you know, at that time, Palestine was very much, you know, part of Turkey to an extent. And so when they decided to give this land, they gave 90% of it over to the Arabs. Now, over the years, we have seen what has happened with the Jews right around the world, especially with the German situation. And of course, every Jew feels the need to go back home. And as the Jews are returning back home, they are taking, as it were, more and more land from the Palestinians. And so this is creating this whole problem here. And of course, the Jews have the sympathy of the planet, because when we speak of the Holocaust, everybody, especially here in the United Kingdom or even in the US, or in Europe, just mention the Holocaust. And we are all sympathetic towards what has happened to the Jews. And this has helped to fuel, if you like, Israel being able to continue to encroach on the land. So I think what needed to have happened by now, when you think about this, is that we needed to have sat down to have a better conversation, I think, to the conversations that we've been having in the UN. We needed to have had more of a conversation of fairness, more of a conversation of consideration. And I think, we probably drew a little bit closer to that during the Obama administration. But by then, there are so many more Jews on the West Bank right now. There's the whole issue and the argument of where the capital of Jerusalem should be. There is, we've also had promises with a number of US presidents as to where that capital was going to be, fueling, they've always tended to be a lot more sympathetic towards the Israelis and not so much towards the Palestinians. So in order for the international community to get a grip on this, I think we all need to go back to the drawing board and have a conversation where we need to reevaluate how this land is now shared, and be willing to also persuade both sides. Because obviously everybody feels very hard done by. It's historical. And there's also a degree of spirituality involved, because, these are also, it's not just fought on, say, on ethnic grounds, but it's also on religious grounds as well. And, the religious aspect of things makes both sides extremely determined to continue what they believe is there, whether it's the holy ground or the religious rights that was granted to them religiously. So these are very, very sensitive issues and sensitive areas. And in order for them to have a grip, there needs to be a conversation. We need to go back to the table. And with this conversation must take into consideration both sides.
Thanks a lot, Priscilla. Juliana, going back to the basis, engaging in more conversation. Juliana, do you think this is possible? Going back to the basis, going back to the drawing board? Reviewing the whole situation. Former President Donald Trump did supporting the capital of Israel being moved to Jerusalem, and with the Palestinians claiming a part of East Jerusalem as a very key part of their territory. Would ever going back to the basis be a resolution to this? And what does going back to the basis mean? Children are dying, women are dying from airstrikes. How do we put an end to this?
Well, I'm going to offer a twist because I don't think that we can ever really truly go backwards. I think the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is actually going forward. It's actually going to the children and the next generations that are going to occupy that area. It's actually proposing to them that there is a third option. Conflicts that are led by extremists, and at this particular point, these conflicts are led by extremists, have to find a moderate, and they have to find a third position. Future generations are built differently. Yes, they're carrying on the flags of their fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers and believe it to be a point of pride. But they're also carrying the flag of the future that they want for themselves. I propose that going back to the drawing board doesn't have to be an exercise of really going backwards, but really a conversation about what does Israel and Palestine, what does the Holy Land, Jerusalem, really want for itself in the future and for its future generation. It's about posing the fact that there is a third thing that they can focus on, which is what their nation building is like. They're right in the center, surrounded by several other nations. If they continue to destroy themselves, continue to kill themselves, continue to kill off their intergenerational lines to really have prosperity, to maintain their heritage and maintain their futures and their cultures, they open themselves up to a third occupation that they're not thinking about right now. I believe that if there's an opportunity to speak to the leaders to talk about the future of the holiest land in the world, purportedly, of the future of those two nations, of the future of the culture, what they're actually doing this for, is these children that are dying right now, the intergenerational aspect, and what that nation could actually look like if they actually focused on what a future looks like. Then, as my colleague said, think about what the lands would look like in an opportunity for fairness in the interest of that future. Most every nation has come out of conflict. Let's just be honest, right? But the turning point for most nations is when they actually turn away from their past and away from their conflicts and their civil wars and actually engage in what they would like to see for their future. The millisecond that they are thinking industrially as far as what the future of Israel, Palestine could look like, what it can do industrially, what their education, what their culture, what they can actually preserve through Jerusalem and keep that as a middle ground that is preserved by both, honored by both. I think that then that opens up a different conversation for the next generation. See, all these leaders here, nobody lives forever. As we say in Nigeria, no condition is permanent, and nobody lives forever. Right? And with that, the next generation, to me, humbly, would be my focus, is who are the rising future leaders of these great nations and states? What do they want for themselves? And then how can they participate in what's happening now in the interest of their futures?
But before I let you go, Juliana, you were a one-time staff of the United Nations for Peace and Security, the division of the UNDP. Look, so much killings going on there, so much blood being shed. You just said that the holiest land in the holiest, supposedly holiest land in the world, we have blood being shed, innocent blood being shed. Why is the United Nations, either at the Security Council level or at the General Assembly, cannot just condemn airstrike that Israel is aggressively embarking on the Palestinian territory? Why? No fly zone, can't they just stop them?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have no authority to speak to what the UN strategically is doing. But what I can share with you is peace is not always the absence of conflict. Sometimes it's the management of it. And sometimes it takes different groups working in different ways to create the infrastructure, to create the management, so that you can get to a point of peace, to get to the point of negotiation, to get to the point of growth. I cannot speak to that because the UN is an organization that has different governing bodies, have different strategies, and really, to be very honest, all nations function by interests. I know we want all nations to function by humanitarian efforts and their heart and soul, and that's what we might see on the brochures of every nation: democracy for all, freedom for all. But to be quite frank, when we actually get into the room and get into the table, we're talking about interests. And interests are a different kind of negotiating table, because it weighs in, future events with current events and continues to ebbs and flows. And that's what weighs in on who's involved with what, who is behind the scenes for what, is centered around interests. So I cannot speak for why the UN can swoop in. I think sometimes when people hear the United Nations, the name sounds so glorious. They almost sound like superheroes. Right. But really, they're a body made of people and leaders who have flaws and who have interests. I think, like I said, our focus has to be on how do we wrangle the future generations that are being sacrificed in this holy land? How do we create a third focus for these two groups that have been doggedly focused on each other for over 100 years?
All right, Juliana.
And how do we start talking about that conversation? To me, would be the best suggestion.
Right, Juliana, you raised very fundamental issues about interest. Interest, it does appear to us here, the world is not finding any interest in the Palestinian territory, either economic interest or political interest. It's about interest. But quickly, before we round up the program, Priscilla, unlike what we had in 2014, in Israel, we have had conflict. The Arab Israelis and the Jews, so the Arabs in Israel and the Jews in Israel. So we've had very, very serious conflict within Israel itself. It appears we are having a cultural and a social dimension, unlike what we had in 2014, to this conflict now, and is a damaging one. How serious do you think this will be between the Arab Israelis and the Jewish?
I think it's it will be very serious and it's extremely sensitive. And as Juliana has said, should the focus be moved from, say, the interest of the standing on the extremism, and it's moved to the next generation, then we begin to look at what these nations do and the benefits that they can have with each other. We know that industrially, Israel it's great technology-wise. Their agriculture is great, transportation, manufacturing. So they could be, in that sense, if the Arab and the Jewish children, next generation, can look at each other and see each other as the future and understand that the war is not what's going to, if they continue in this war, they will have no future. But if they can see the future and be able to talk to each other on the basis of what is available to them and what they can do, I think that will be a way out. But before that can happen, it's important to note that, these extremists, they grow each other. They hand over the baton to the next generation. It doesn't just go away just so easily. So, there will always be another extremist that would rise up. You would have thought that, with the change of baton, as it were, with Palestine, the former leader, when he passed on, his name escapes me right now, you would have thought that things would have been better but unfortunately, it carries on, it continues. And so that they need to look, change that focus. The young people, the next generation, need to speak each other and recognize perhaps they're stronger in their diversity and work with that.
All right, thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for taking your time to join us on the program today. We have been looking at the escalation of hostilities between Israel and Palestine. I'd love to take this beyond those two nations and bring it back to Nigeria, but I am really out of time. My producer is already screaming to my ears, boy, get out of that place. All right, I'm leaving now. Juliana Njoku, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the program today. Juliana is a Nigerian-born U.S. citizen, a former staff of the United Nations for Peace and Security Division of the UNDP, a policy analyst with conflict and peace management, including sustained background from the University of Maryland, College Park, and Harvard. And we've been joined by my very good friend and colleague in London, Priscilla Nwipo, a British journalist who is vast and also a lawyer as well. Thank you so much, ladies. I called the guests earlier on, and my producer said, oh boy, no, these ones are not guests, or they are ladies. Anyway, whichever one you can choose. Thank you for taking the time. Enjoy your weekend, and my sincere appreciation to everyone who has been part of the program today. Keep safe, and I'll see you next week Friday.